The following is a JourneyWise Network production.
One of my dearest friends is the CEO and chair of the First Horizon Corporation. Now, if you live outside of the Memphis area, you know that maybe First Horizon is not on the tip of your tongue, but it's an $80 billion banking investment company that is one of the great banks in our area. It also has a corporate culture of over 150 years with tens of thousands of employees. But as I got to meet Bryan, I met him first as just a friend and a member of the congregation where I served. But I began to learn a lot about the daily routine of being a good follower of Jesus, but also what it meant to lead faithfully in the name of Jesus. I'm so excited about today's conversation. Welcome to You Matter podcast and our conversation with banking CEO Bryan Jordan. Hey, friends, I want to welcome you to our You Matter podcast. This particular conversation that we're having is about faith and the impact or role of faith in what I call the real world, the everyday world, people who get up and go to jobs that have nothing to do with church or ministry. And how does their faith inform and impact what they do? And our guest today is someone who's become a really dear friend of mine. In fact, several years ago, when Bryan Jordan started attending the church where I was pastor, I set up almost about monthly there for a little while, and I would ask him one question after another when we would have breakfast or lunch, whether it was about the banking world or about investments or just leadership in general. And he became such a wonderful source of wisdom for me. And I use a lot of that today as I'm in a whole new world and adventure myself. But Bryan then became chair of what we call our staff parish committee at Christ Church. It's sort of our personnel committee. And so we got to work 2 years right in the middle of COVID, having to make a lot of decisions, and of course, became a very important part of my journey. So, Bryan Jordan, welcome to You Matter.
Thank you, Shane. It's great to be with you.
Well, thank you for doing this. I know you're busy, and Bryan, our conversation is about how faith has affected and informed your leadership in life, and that's our first question. And how would you answer that question?
Well, I think it's endemic to everything that I do. When I think about my leadership style and how I make decisions, it really goes back to the foundation that my parents gave me as a young child. My brother and I took on a paper route. I was, I think, 12, and I think Jeff was 11. And we paid our bills, bought our papers, collected for our papers. But the first check we wrote every month was our tithe to the church. And so it's sort of been part of my everyday life as long as I can remember growing up in the church. You have to forgive me for growing up Presbyterian, but I grew up in the church, and it's been a part of everything that I processed the world through, and it really plays an active part of the way I think about right, wrong, the way I think about the stewardship I provide for the organization and the folks that I have an opportunity to work with. And it gives me sort of a framework to think about the world in a way that makes it logical and allows you to get it right day in and day out.
Well, I mean, that's a wonderful answer. For those who maybe do not know who you are and what you do, tell us a little bit about your current role in the business world, and maybe a little bio of where you came from and how you arrived to where you are today.
Yeah, happy to do that. I have to admit to be a recovering accountant. I grew up in public accounting. Today, I'm a banker. I'm the chair and CEO of First Horizon Corporation. We're about an $80 billion banking organization serving 12 states, mostly in the South. We serve well over 1 million customers, and we have about 7,500 associates who are out in the marketplace every single day taking care of their customers and their community. I
Wow.
spent, after public accounting, I had the opportunity to work in some larger organizations, and so I've seen a good bit of the banking industry over the last 25, 30 years.
Wow. Now you're married to Kim, and you have three children, and you have grandchildren. Tell us a little bit about your family.
Yeah. Kim and I have been married for 35 years. We have three children. Our oldest two, both girls, are married. Our daughter in Nashville and her husband have a son who will be two in April. Our daughter here in Memphis and her husband have a son and a daughter. Our granddaughter will be 3.5, and our grandson will be 2 in June.
Wow.
And Kendall, the daughter here, is due again in April, so she's going to have three,
Wow.
under the age of 4 by the end of April. So while they go into the zone defense, we're going to get a chance to substitute and play a little more defense with them.
Well, that first little one, in fact, when we were doing a lot of Zoom meetings, and I would see her come up, and you'd put her in your lap, and she's precious. But I know that your family means a lot to you, having gotten to know who you are. Um, have you ever experienced a time in your life where maybe a struggle or a difficulty, a period where your faith really became, so central to the decisions and the directions you were leading?
Yeah, I think it's almost impossible to raise teenagers without having that kind of event,
Sure.
and the stress of raising teenagers for all parents is compounded by some of the elements that we all deal with today. And I'd say it's worse today than when my children were teenagers,
Mm.
anywhere between 15 and 10 years ago. And it's social media, it's the access to influences that really weren't in the world. Some of the same fundamental vices when I was a child or a teenager are still
Sure.
there, but the risks are significantly greater. And so I found Kim and I both found that as we were raising teenagers, it was really a lot of times you had to rely on your faith to sort of figure out what's the right answer here, where do you draw the lines, how do you draw those lines, and how do you do it in such a way that your child remains confident and capable of making decisions grounded hopefully in faith, and at the same time acting as a responsible young person. And
Mm.
faith really was a framework for how you dealt with some of those tough days.
Well, and as you think about that in your family, you're also dealing with people on your team and in your organization who have families and the same issues that you're dealing with. What Christian values or values of your faith do you think are most important? First of all, being the leader of an organization, and then as you go to be a father and a husband, do you think is it different values? Is it the same values, or different impacts of that? What would you say to that?
Yeah. Yeah, it's the same values. I'm not smart enough to live by two sets of values. I think it's got that consistency. And you make a really good point. As you think about organizations like First Horizon, it is made up of roughly 7,500 or so associates, as I said. Those are all people. They all have their same families and concerns. And while their facts and circumstances can, and in all likelihood, are different, they have the same basic obligations and responsibilities that either one of us or any human has. And so you almost have to think about leading an organization like leading a family. It
Mm.
is very, very similar in my view. And in fact, I say quite often to our people, we are a large family. We have our disagreements, we have our arguments and disputes. We all get together for Thanksgiving. And I think if you apply that approach to leading an organization, because there are very few companies, banking in particular, where I think the most important assets are on the balance sheet. I think most important assets in any organization are the people.
Mm.
And if you treat people like people, you see people as human beings that have concerns that extend well beyond what they do in the office from 8 to 5 or 8 to 10 or however long they work. It really does make you a better organization. And I think ultimately it makes leaders better leaders.
Well, Brian, I for years I did a lot of family counseling, and we talked a lot about family of origin and the organization. And I know you talk a lot about how your parents impacted you in your family life, and I'm sure that's impacted the way you are a father and a husband, but your organization, it has a long family of origin. Y'all are 150 plus years old, right?
Yep.
How do you,
159, end of this month, 159. We were
wow, my
founded in
goodness.
the Civil War. Abraham Lincoln was president. We were
Wow.
founded right here in Memphis, about 3 blocks from where I sit today.
How do you think, how did the family of origin, the ones that came before you at First Horizon, how did the values they set affect how you came in to be the leader?
Yeah, it's interesting that the culture of our organization is extraordinarily strong, and it's rather timely that you asked the question. Ron Terry, who passed away a week ago today and was laid to rest on Friday, was our chief executive officer from 73 to 93, 95, 22 years. Ron led the organization. And Ron created something that we still use today. He called it First Power, or the company called it First Power. And it was really designed around the notion that employees or associates who are, one, committed to their organization, excited to be a part of it, proud of their organization, are going to be excited about taking care of their customers and their communities and their shareholders. And it really worked from our associates out. It kept everything in balance. And I've said to people, and I said in speaking about Ron last week, that is a big part of our foundation today. That when we went through the difficult years of repositioning our company, where we had to make a number of very tough decisions about business lines and expense levels and things like that in 2008, 9, and 10, it was that First Power culture, that commitment to getting it right, taking care of customers and communities, that really I give Ron a lot of credit for building into the fabric, and then his successors, my predecessors, maintaining that through the culture of the organization.
And y'all are in the midst of a pretty significant transition now. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, we are in a transition. We have signed an agreement to merge with Toronto Dominion Bank, TD, America's most convenient bank here in the United States. It is a $1.8 trillion organization globally. It is a $600 billion post-merger organization in the United States. So roughly the sixth largest bank in the United States by deposits. What it would do is, in our view, bring a much broader product set to our customers, both on the retail and on the commercial side. But the thing I'm most excited about is the cultural fabric of Toronto Dominion, or TD, is extraordinarily similar to what we have here at First Horizon. It's focused on associates, customers, communities. Folks get involved in giving back to the community, and the cultural fabric of the two firms fit together so nicely. It was a perfect partner for us.
Guys, I want to tell you about a project that we have been working on for a long time, and we are so excited that it is officially out in the world for you to get to be a part of.
Yes.
Shane, why don't you tell us a little bit about our newest book?
Well, it's part of a Life Along the Way series. Jesus was referred to as the Way. The first 200 years of the church is life. And so how do you walk along the way with Jesus? What we've done is taken all four Gospels and the first chapter of Acts. We put them into chronological order, and they've come out into 360 devotionals. And so in 4 90-day devotionals, you can walk with Jesus every day in the same pattern and same that the Bible has it. And the first one is Jesus with us. It's the first 90 days, talks about the beginning, the prophecies of his birth and the coming of the Lord. And then it talks about his birth and several years after that, and just helps you to feel like you are at the very beginning, truly at the start of the journey of Jesus, and what a powerful impact that can make in your life.
So you and I have been doing this
Yes.
for a year. We've been walking through 365 days with Jesus. And I
Yeah.
think for myself personally, what's been so impactful about reading it in chronological order and reading it slowly. We don't we're not skipping around on what we like
Yeah.
about what Jesus says and
Yeah.
what he doesn't, right? We're spending time in all of his words
Yes.
and getting to know him as a whole person. And so I think whether our listeners are have been walking with Jesus for a long time, or maybe are just wanting to get to know Jesus, this is a great devotional for them.
C.S. Lewis says if you're going to tell the story, you need to tell the whole story. And this is the whole story.
Yeah. Well, guys, I want y'all to get a copy of this book. We'll put the links in the show notes for you to be able to get a hold of it. It has been truly life transforming for me, and I want you to be a part of it as well. Join us on the journey.
You know, one of the reasons I always loved talking with you, Bryan, is that you and you said it perfectly just a few minutes ago, is that using the same values in your life, whatever the relationship is really the core for how you do life well. And, you know, right now we know that change, according to a recent survey that came out, change and uncertainty are the most fragile parts that people feel like are that they're dealing with in the world. And you know, you have all these other issues that we measure things, inflation, and whether it's unemployment or whatever it might be, really what we're talking about is the uncertainty for tomorrow. And that's what people struggle with. What would you say to someone, regardless if they're in banking or not, what would you say to someone who's facing change and uncertainty about how to walk through that?
Yeah, it's funny, Shane. I've had a lot of conversations, as you can imagine, over the last year as people have tried to figure out what does TD mean to them? What does that merger mean in terms of their job? What does it mean in terms of company culture, process, procedure? And I've said a number of different times over the last year that uncertainty is one of those things that very few people go seek out to add to their life. You know, it's one of the
Yeah.
things that we try to take out of our lives, and living with it is um, a real difficult thing because it creates anxiety, and particularly gets compounded when you come home and the question is from a spouse, did you learn any more this week? And the answer is yeah, not yet. Spouse, significant other, brother, father, son, mother, it doesn't really matter who's asking the question. It just sort of accentuates that I don't have questions I don't have answers to. And what I've said to people is, you know, a pretty good place to get grounded is in the old serenity prayer, you know,
Yeah.
to change the things that you can, accept those that you can't, and pray for the wisdom to know the difference. And if you can find comfort in, I'll go deal with what I can deal with. I'll change what I can't. I'll accept what I can't, and I'll have the wisdom to sort that out. I think that helps people actually find the serenity to deal with the uncertainty that comes in life. And I think, you know, I use the context of our merger, but you know, we've got an economy that is more uncertain. We're seeing inflation that is extraordinarily high. We've seen interest rates moving up very rapidly. This is a combination that people haven't seen since the early 80s.
Yeah.
And then you put into it all the uncertainty of politics and global geopolitical issues. There's plenty of uncertainty in life, and for me, you know, helping people find a place to get grounded and to accept those things as they are, but get grounded in faith and serenity in a God centered world.
Why do you think it's so difficult for people to do that though? I mean, if because I mean I love what you said. I agree totally with you. And I've my whole life has been about, well, there's only so many things I can deal with, and then there's a lot in my life that I had no control over. But why would you say it's hard for people to do that?
Yeah. I've got a good friend that says to me all the time, John Hope Bryant, who runs Operation Hope and is a lot of things, but he's a bit of he's a Christ-centered philosopher as well. And he says to me all the time, Shane, if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans.
Yeah.
And I think it's because we have all these plans, and it is that we want to control outcomes, that we want to make our plans for financial world, health world, whatever it is, we've got a vision of how things ought to work out. And what we know is that's not how things are going to play out. Sometimes it will, sometimes it won't, but it is completely out of our control. And that out of control piece is, I think, the biggest thing that I deal with, and I suspect others do as well.
Since I've known you, I've learned how you are quietly connected to so many things that mean a lot to you in serving, Operation Hope being one of them. And I love that ministry. What are some of the things that you're involved in? I know youth villages at one point was a very big part of your life. And just what are some of the ways that you're the hands and feet of Jesus or try to be out in the world?
Yeah, recently I've aged out of my board role at youth villages, but I stay very connected there. I think it's an outstanding
Yes.
organization.
Great ministry.
I've been involved in healthcare. I think particularly in West Tennessee to a lesser extent, but Tennessee in general, we have too many people who don't get adequate health care, and we don't do enough on the front end to prevent some of the preventative causes of poor health longer term, pre-diabetes to diabetes,
Yes.
and all the negative outcomes. For example, I'm involved on the board at Memphis Tomorrow. I've been involved in the Federal Reserve Board for the last 13 years, both at St. Louis and in DC, and then I try to stay involved in supporting a number of community organizations indirectly, like a lot of work we do with the United Way, a lot of work that we do with, as I mentioned, youth villages, St. Jude, Allsack, organizations like that, where we at First Horizon try to play a role, not only here in Memphis, but more broadly to strengthen the economic fabric of the communities that we serve. Then the final one I would mention is I serve on the board of Operation Hope, which is a tremendous asset in trying to fill in a gap I think exists with a lot of people, which is just financial literacy. What
Yes.
does your FICO score mean? How do you get your FICO score up? Why is getting your FICO score up important? When you go borrow money for a car, you go to borrow money for a house, you want a credit card, your FICO score is your entry into the world. And I think that's an important way for us to sort of give back with financial literacy to help people stabilize their financial lives.
Well, you said your entry into the world. I mean, that is such a big deal. And of course, in the church, we talk a lot about it through stewardship. And stewardship, though, is not just about money. It's about time. It's about presence, and all ways that I know that are important to you. I'm going to ask you. We just have a few minutes left. I'm going to ask you the real Bible question. You probably thought you knew it was coming. The Bible says everyone has a spiritual gift. And whether we can identify that or not, I think two-thirds of Christians don't even know the words that are used to do that. But is there something that you really believe that God has gifted you to do as part of the body of Christ?
Yeah, it's interesting. Over the years, I've done the worksheets, and I've tried to work through and see if there's an analytical answer to that. And I come back to, in many ways, I've been blessed in so many areas that it's hard for me to say one more than the other. If you had to pin me down, it would be what somebody said to me last week, which is, how do you remain calm when others are panicked? And I think it is a certain degree of being able to sort of de-emotionalize things, and being able to deal with what is, and figure out how to work through it. It's not particularly glamorous, but I think it may actually lead to boredom, but it's or
Well,
at least boring. But I think that's probably the greatest of many blessings.
as your former pastor and now just friend, I would say you clearly have the gifts of faith and the gifts of discernment. You are also have the gift of leadership, so clearly you do. But you've meant a lot to me, and you've helped me in so many different ways, and I thank you for that. Last question. When you in Matthew chapter 5, verses 13 through 16, which is really sort of the key scripture of this podcast series, when Jesus says, "You are the salt of the earth and you're the light of the world." When you hear the phrase "be salt and light," what does that mean to you?
Most basically, it means lead through example every single day.
Wow, that's great.
You use your talents to set a good example
Mm.
and help others see, that there is something greater in the world.
Well, thank you, Bryan. I pray for you every day, and I appreciate you. And thanks for being a part of this and doing this.
Well, thank you, my friend.
Take a moment, if you would, to please hit that subscribe button. And we also need you to do a 5-star rating. And then, of course, we would love a review. We are a ministry of JourneyWise Network, and we would love to hear back from you. So go to journeywise.network and send us a message that we can share. God bless you.